Welcome back to Iron and Intention, the show where strength meets purpose. Today, it's also the space where resilience meets real world experience and where we explore what strengthens us and challenges us and shapes our purpose. Today, we're diving into something often unspoken and profoundly influential for anyone who serves their community. That topic is the inner voice. Joining us today is someone who knows the weight of decisions and responsibility of leadership and the pressure of high stakes moments. Our guest today is Claire Canaan, a former law enforcement officer and an emergency management director. She has navigated through crisis and command situations and understands that human side of service. Claire, welcome to the show. You want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name's Claire Canaan, Chief Wright. I don't know if you go by Chief Wright or Tommy on your podcast.
I just go by Tommy. That's
Tommy.
fine.
As you mentioned, I have a background in law enforcement. I worked for a sheriff's office for just short of 13 years. And in that time, I was a sworn deputy. I worked in multiple capacities that included working in detention, dispatch, in public information, community outreach, community policing, patrol. In 2022, I made the jump out of law enforcement and went into emergency management. It's kind of taking a risk going into that, but it fell in line with my experience in public information, community outreach, community preparedness, and I've been doing that since. So it was a good jump, and it's funny to think back to 2010 when I first got into law enforcement, that I would have never put myself where I'm at now.
Yeah, and you do a fantastic job. You're really well respected in this region in terms of, and in the state in terms of emergency management. So again, welcome. Thanks for being on our show. We're going to jump right in. So let's take you back to the beginning of your journey, inside this profession. When did you first become aware of an inner voice while you were working? Was it, in the field, in command? Was it during an emergency situation? When did you become aware of that?
I think it was from the get-go, in the academy, and it got louder and louder as, obviously years of experience and things went on. But I just remember being even in the academy and always, and maybe I'm just an internal talker, like my inner voice is just always talking. So it's like I'm talking to myself all the time. But in those early law enforcement days, just constantly repeating to myself, stay sharp, don't miss something, your mistakes can hurt others and yourself, and just being young and experiencing a whole new life and just different stressors that I had not experienced up to that point. And then on top of that, being a female in law enforcement, it was another layer of having to prove competency and not let emotions overtake critical decision making. And so I think it was a constant inner voice, and it obviously transformed over the years based on where I was at in my career, what I was doing. But I think early on it was always there, and it's just something that was constantly present. I think early on too, it kept me vigilant, but at the same time, looking back now, I can tell that I was very critical of myself too, and held myself not to a higher standard, but I was much more, no mistakes can happen. If I make a mistake, then that is my worth. And so early on, that's where my inner voice was, and that's where I just didn't. I think I notice it more now looking back. Hindsight's 2020. Looking back and evaluating it, it's like, oh yeah, that's how it's changed. So
Right. Do you think that inner voice was helping you or hurting you? Do you think it was more controlling you at that point in your career?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think in the beginning, obviously, it's helpful. It made me competent. It made me strive to do my best. But then I also wasn't giving myself grace. Those early times, I acknowledged, yeah, I made a mistake, but then I would focus on that mistake constantly and not want to make it again, which is good and bad. Any kind of uh, just constant pressure like that, it wears on you. And so I think it helped make me prepared. But I think also, just as I grew in my profession, in just life through experiences, I was able to turn that inner voice into being more productive for what I was trying to do in my day-to-day life.
So that's great. And you talk about, how you've turned it into something productive, which kind of leads into my next question. After everything you've seen, everything that you've led and been in charge of, been responsible for, It sounds like your inner voice really is more helpful. So would you consider it be more of a coach, or would you consider it to be a critic or a protector, or even something else?
I think a coach, a teammate, even in some things, because it's now, and speaking more to where it's progressed and where it's grown to, it's more, hey, mistakes happen. How do we learn from them? Versus you made a mistake. That is how you are judged and graded. And that's how people see your performance because of this one mistake you made. Versus, hey, you made a mistake. What people are going to judge you by or look at, they're going to see how you grow from that mistake or how you fix or change things so you don't make that same mistake again. So I feel like it's kind of a coach where it's like, here's the mistake, how do we fix it? Versus here's the mistake, you failed. And,
Yeah.
and what did you learn from this mistake?
Yeah.
What can you change to be better next time?
Yeah, that inner voice, when we don't control it, it controls us, and it makes us what our last mistake was. So that's great you pointed that out. How would you say that your inner voice has shaped your identities as a first responder or even an emergency manager, especially when that uniform or title is comes off?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I started when I was 21, just getting ready to turn 22. I had a relationship at the time, but that was, I mean, really the only person I had to care about was myself and my boyfriend. And then we had a dog. So, for the longest time, it was like I could work my normal shifts, but then I could work overtime. And that's who I was. I was a deputy sheriff. I had friends outside of the law enforcement world, but majority of them were my friends from the academy. They're my friends from my detention, like my shift I'm on. We worked the weird schedules. I was on midnights for, the first 6 months. So I'd hang out, I'd work with these people for 8 to 12 hours. And then it's like, hey, let's go get breakfast. And then, okay, we're going to all go home and sleep for 9 to 10 hours and then do it all over again. Early on, for several years, it was like, I am a deputy sheriff. I am in law enforcement. And I think that happens with everyone to a point. I think, and I see it a lot, obviously, in first responders and public safety, police, fire, medics. It's just because we give so much time to that profession. It's hard to identify with anything outside of it. I remember in the academy talking about used to, or I can't even think what it was called. It was like, used to do this, used to do that. It's like, oh, I used to be into biking. I used to be in doing things outdoors and used to have all these hobbies and bringing attention to acknowledging that, catching it, and not getting deep into that hole of, well, I used to do all these things, but now I'm a cop. Now I'm law enforcement because it's just, it overwhelms and you don't notice it. I feel like sometimes until it's too late that becomes your identity. And so in that, the mistakes you make in your profession bleed over into your personal life. And it's just, if you're not doing well in a professional capacity, that's going to bleed over into who you are personally in your relationships at home and with your friends outside of law enforcement. And that's just kind of, I noticed that early on. And I don't know if we'll get into talking about this later, but what really caused the shift was when I had children. And so that was the big time because my husband, he was in law enforcement too, and so our world was law enforcement, and so kids were that big shift in where I started to pull back from that as my only identity.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I suffered that, and I still kind of do on occasion, but as I've gotten older and really later in my career, I realized how that was not really a healthy way for me to live life. And so my whole identity revolved around work
Hmm.
and who I was at work. I think now that I'm kind of hitting that end part of my career, I'm seeing that there's so many things that I missed just by identifying with my work. So, and some of that was a health and wellness aspect. I
Hmm.
kind of lost myself over the last 10 or 15 years. And I think that's kind of where I've been at. And really, I mean, you are just killing it in the gym. Your photos and stuff that you're posting, you are really getting after it. So maybe you can talk on that a little bit. Why the shift? What caused you to go back and really get at it like you're getting at it now, health wise?
It was something I used to do. It seemed like I had children, and then we had big changes. We moved from Kansas to Missouri. My husband and I both started new jobs out of law enforcement, and my focus on personal health and wellness and, eating right and just being active, it wasn't as high of a priority. I also know that I need somebody to to tell me what to do, basically, because I go with the best of intentions, but if I'm like, this is kind of hard, like I get beat out. So, it's just, I'm like, I can't, some people are like, I can go to the gym and do, 2 hours of weights and cardio. And I'm like, I would go the rest of my life without having to do cardio. If somebody's there to say you need to do this, then I'll be like, okay, everybody else is doing it. Like peer pressure works in that case. Um, in my new job in emergency management, working for the city of Belton, there I actually made a friend, and she's the administrative assistant for the fire department, and she was going to the gym I go to, and my cousin actually is the head trainer there. So I already had some connections, and they were like, "You should come. We get like you can come to a free session." And I was like, all right, like I'll go try it out. I was working out at the time, but what I was doing was up to 3 days a week for like 30 minutes. It was coach led, but I felt good, but I wasn't as consistent with it as I probably needed to be. And so I went to that first class and I was like, this is fun. I was like, this is the kind of group classes I enjoy. Everybody's friendly. I love the environment. It's like a whole new group of friends that I've made over, I don't even, since April, I think is when I first went. So just over almost like the last year. And it's something different every day, which is good for me. Because if you make me do the same thing every day, I will lose interest. Like I know that much about myself. Um, and I feel good afterwards. And that part where I was like, oh, okay, like that was something I didn't know I was missing until I started experiencing it again. And so I was like, this is great. Another thing is that they are very um, focused on like families, and they're a gym for moms and women, and it's only women that work out there. They've got free babysitting opportunities. They've got kids camps once a month. We just had another kids camp yesterday that my daughters love, and they ask about it like every week. They're
Right.
like, when is the kids workout? When is the kids workout? And they just have a blast doing it. And so that to me, I was like, this is cool. Like I get my me time majority of the month. I get to go early in the morning, focus on myself. I'm up, my brain's starting to fire, before I have to get everybody else up in the house. And they also get to enjoy it too. And they're learning healthy habits. So yeah. And so they're having a good time. They enjoy it. I don't want to raise kids that don't want to go outside and play, because that's just it's too nice outside sometimes. It's like some fresh air. That's how I was raised. So it just all kind of fell into line perfectly when all of that took place. And so, but I think the support from my family helps. My husband lets me I go at 5 in the morning, which if you would ask me like 6 months ago, I'd have been like, I need to test this out because I don't know if I can consistently do this. But it gets easier and easier. But no, it's been great. I have the support at home. I get the support at the gym. I get support from friends. I like being able to focus on myself, but also make myself a good example for my girls. It's fun to be. I didn't realize it was fun to be like strong. Like, I don't know. I never did like weightlifting stuff. And I was like, doing deadlifts and stuff. I was like, oh, I didn't know I could do these things. And it's cool. So it's just fun learning new things about myself still at, my age. So like, this is
Sure.
enjoyable. I like it.
Well, so in terms of, and this is really off topic and not what we would discuss, but I think it's a good point. As an emergency management director, you're under a lot of pressure to be able to perform both during the emergencies and in your preparation phases for those emergencies. Do you feel like the fitness that you've acquired over the last year, do you think that helps you under pressure better, gives you a little more ability under pressure?
I think physical health translates into better mental health too in multiple facets. I think being physically strong, you're just mentally able to handle a lot as well. And I don't know the right word to say, but basically, I mean, there's a connection that you may not realize is there, but you're having these endorphins come out, and you're doing all these things and it's in a healthy way. You're not getting your adrenaline from really stressful incidents and then having an adrenaline dump and, not able to recover for days because you're just mentally and physically exhausted. I think there's that connection that is not maybe outright, but I personally think having that, my energy is up, I'm able to focus better. Like I just, and that could be related to working out and the exercising and that stuff. Or I mean, it could be a plethora of things. It could be just the personal connections that I'm making. And just, I'm sure there's all kinds of things happening in brains that all play into that besides physical health, playing into mental health. But I think having different veins in your life that are not just one path, it's all these different things that are important for you in your life and day to day are going to make you a stronger person just overall. So I think being able to focus, get to work, I've been awake, I'm not tired, I've got natural energy to where I can focus better on what my task is.
Right. Excellent.
Mhm.
So it's no surprise to any of us, but this work comes with a certain level of things that you simply can't fix. There's situations where you just can't save someone, you can't save the day. It just is what it is, and you just can't control how things turn out. On those days, Claire, do you think that, your inner voice, does it have anything to say about what your worth is, or does it continue on that positive path?
I think now, as I've grown, gone through things, I think early on, my early inner voice would have been like, you didn't fix everything here. Like you hear it and people say, it's cliche, but people get into law enforcement and public safety to help people. And if you can't help that person, then you failed, or, you're not the best cop out there because you couldn't solve this problem. But I think especially maybe even in like dispatch time, because that was a position where we could only do so much over the phone with somebody who was in crisis or dealing with a situation. And so we didn't always, one, know what the resolution was or what did the problem get solved, because as soon as on scene officers got there, we were no longer a part of that situation. So that helped kind of shift it to like your worth isn't determined by the outcome of a situation. It's determined by, did you do everything that you know you can do? Did you maintain your integrity? Did you do what you were supposed to? Did you do the right things for the right reason? And if you did all those things and you stayed true to who you were and how you should have done things, then you did what you should have. Your worth is not less because you didn't get the outcome you wanted. And so I think that was a really important reframe of determining your worth and knowing that we aren't going to fix every problem, but it's how we approach it, and that we did everything we could to at least try to fix it. So that's how I kind of look at things now. It's like, yeah, well, I wasn't able to, I did everything I could though. I tried. In emergency management, just something that pops to mind is like, we had an issue with our outdoor warning sirens. And when that was happening and our sirens needed to be activated, I went through my whole list of, okay, here's how I test, here's how I run them, here's how I make them activate. Okay, it didn't do that. And so I ran through a list of like 4 things, and they just didn't work. They didn't go off. So immediately I was like, okay, well, I need to fix this problem. Like, what happened? But the damage was already done. Like, I had not been able to get my sirens did not do what they were supposed to when they were supposed to do it. And so it was something where I acknowledged that, yeah, but then I don't want it to happen again. So what do I need to do to fix that so it doesn't happen again? Um, and I think there was a couple moments where I was like, this is just happened across the state, in another city, and their emergency manager took the brunt of it. And I was like, oh no, like, so there's a moment where my inner voice was like, you failed, but I think I quickly had to be like, wait, like, yeah, these didn't work, but there's so many different things that are at play here. So let's fix it so that next time we can still gain the community's trust. We can build it back up, even if some of it's like been, shattered, but we can build this back up. We can be open and transparent with them. It's like, it's not the end. This happens. It's not the only thing. And so that helped, I think, me immediately jump into like the problem solving part of it of, okay, let's fix it. Let's talk about it. And by, I think, less than 48 hours later, I mean, even less than 24 hours later, we had it. I had the problem identified, the solution in place, and less than 48 hours, we were able to do a secondary test of our outdoor warning siren system in the county or in the city, and it was fine. Everything has resolved within that time. And so instead of spiraling and being like, well, that's it. So I think that was big paradigm shift in the brain of, hey,
Sure.
we can fix this.
Right. Well, I think it's important to point this out for our listeners and viewers is that instead of making this all about you with your inner voice, and what you failed at doing, you looked at it from a processes standpoint. We aren't our last mistake that we made.
Mhm.
When we looked at it from a processes and problem solving standpoint, which is what you did, it keeps that focus off us and allows us to control that inner narrative. So good pointing
Mhm.
that out.
Mhm.
Um, during the high stress moments, Claire, everything's moving fast and the stakes are real. I mean, you're making decisions that impact people's lives. In those moments, does your inner voice, what does it do first? Does it slow you down? Does it sharpen your focus? Or does it add more pressure?
I think initially you get that little burst of energy, adrenaline where it's like, oh no, like things are happening. And I think you have to make that intentional shift in your mind of what's my first step? Let me take a couple deep breaths. Let me focus. I know how to respond to this. And I mean, that's the thing with emergency management is we love plans. Like we we plan, we prepare, and so it's like, all right, if I don't have a plan for this, I know many, many people, even just immediately around the metro, who are willing to pick up a phone and walk me through something too. And
Right.
so I think making sure that initial voice isn't what maintains. It's not the, urgent and spiraling voice of, oh no, oh no, no. It's taking a step back, taking a breath. Because if I approach solving a problem in that heightened state of panic, I'm going to have less of a chance of solving the problem correctly and the way it should be solved versus if I take a couple seconds, step back, refocus, and make sure that inner voice isn't steering me down the wrong path.
Gotcha. So if you were to tell our listeners or viewers, how do you recognize when your inner voice is helping you versus when it's hijacking you and making you the enemy?
I think it's just hard at first. If you aren't recognizing that inner voice is hijacking you in your decision making, I think you've got to not be afraid to talk about, mindfulness and being able to internally look in going back and how did I respond to this incident? Why did I respond to this incident this way? And so I think it is a process that people have to take. I don't know that it's something that maybe naturally comes to everybody. And so I think asking people, asking peers, how do you respond to these certain situations and being open to saying, oh, yeah, maybe my inner voice is hijacking the way I'm trying to respond to these things. So I think lowering the ego and being like, hey, I don't think this isn't the right way to respond to this. And I know that is a very hard thing to do for a lot of people. But I think lowering that ego and taking some inner looks at how you're handling things or how you're responding to stuff.
We all carry messages that help shape us. Is there anything that you've internally, that internal dialogue that's helped you establish a belief about service, duty, and responsibility that's kind of helped shape who you are and what you do for your community?
Yeah, I mean, one of those things is in public safety, in a position of service and responsibility. It's not our responsibility to know every single thing or be able to solve every single problem, but we have to know how to ask the right questions, find the right people, and not be too proud to admit that maybe we're not the right person to solve a certain problem. Or I may not have the right answer for you, but I will help you. And being able to guide people to the solutions that they're seeking. And so I think that's a big thing in public safety, law enforcement, emergency management, any of that stuff is I don't know the answer to that, but I have a deep well of people who I can reach out to, a large group of people who are experts in their own fields that are willing to contribute. I think that's just one thing is just you don't have to be the expert on everything, but you have to be able to be okay asking for help.
Excellent. That's a good point. We're not good at that in the emergency services business. So that's excellent. We're kind of winding down towards the end here. One of the things I want to talk about, if you could just share with us, after the call's over, after your activation's over, long after the dust settles, what does your inner voice say to you? And does it help you process what you just went through, or does it cause you to second guess yourself?
I think I've refined it over the years. I will contribute a lot of this to emergency management and the way we handle after actions with critical incidents or with exercises is we talk about what went well, what could have gone better, what needs improvement, and how do we get there? And what are the next steps for that? And what are some things that happened that it's nothing negative, positive, but it's something that happened. You can't change it. It's going to happen. But I think with that, but then also at the sheriff's office when I was there, I was involved with peer support. And I think that doing a lot of those critical incident stress debriefs was like the seed that was planted for talking about. And I know that it's always heavy on like, how are you feeling? Like, how did you immediately feel about this stuff? But I think that helped shift the focus of replaying every tactical decision that was made or operationally, like, what could I have done differently? And digging into that other side of things, that emotional response, the mental clarity and stuff of, okay, yeah, here's how I responded, but why? Okay, I was feeling this way and being able to make those connections. And so I think instead of the constant replaying and then blaming for everything, it was more of a, what happened? How do I learn from this? How do I do it better next time?
Right. So take us away from the job, far away from the radios, the reports, the responsibility. What does your inner voice sound like around family and friends and your kiddos? What is that? What is that telling you inside?
Be present. So I'm going to be the first person to say I am bad with electronics and I have to remind myself I need to be present. This is a short burst of life here that is happening and they're going to be adults and teenagers before I know it. And so being present, not letting moments go by, but then also being a good example. And so I think that's a lot of it. But then if I'm stressed from the job or something like that, knowing in my interactions with my family and my friends, trying my best to not let that bleed over into my relationships with my family and friends. Not leave I can't always leave the job at work. And so sometimes some of that does bleed over and I will have certain calls or hey, we have a big winter storm happening. So at 8 p.m. at night, I'll have to do some communication stuff, but not letting that always be the priority. And having that healthy work-life balance is something that as I've gotten older, my kids have gotten older, and just my priorities have shifted, which also led to me backing away from law enforcement because I felt like I couldn't always get the healthiest balance for work and life. And so it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be there for my kids. Finding a position and also just in my inner voice, just making sure I'm constantly reminding myself to be present, be here with them. They're learning, they're watching, and just trying to keep that how it is, not letting it go down that dark path of, you go back to work, that's all you're doing, that's who you are, and having that affect any kind of relationships outside of that.
Excellent. So, wrapping it up, if there's one thing you could tell other emergency managers out there, people that work inside that field, or even first responders, is there an internal sentence that you could give them, or even a statement, something that they could carry with them that would help them to support a long, meaningful life of service? What does that sound like? What is that for you?
So when I saw that question, I kind of like thought about it, and there were several things that kind of came up. But one that I found that I kind of liked and that I thought really reflected on how I would like to portray this message and this mindset to other folks is you can serve with your whole heart without sacrificing your whole self. And that was something that resonated with me because you can have some of the most successful people we see in this line of work and just in any kind of jobs is they do give their whole heart to the profession and to what they're doing, but it's not their whole self. It's not their whole identity. And so I think there is that fine line. You can give your whole self, you can give your whole heart to something without losing your whole identity to it. So
I'm going to steal that because that's
that's
fantastic.
fine. I saw that, I was like,
That
I'm gonna keep that, and I was like, I like the way that was, I was looking through just a couple different ones and just kind of talking it out, and I was like, I like that. So I like what it means. I like the way it can be heard by other people based on where they are in their lives.
awesome. Thank you,
Mhm.
Claire. Thanks for sharing your voice
Yeah.
and your inner voice
Yes.
with me and with our listeners and viewers. That gives us a language for the unseen. It helps provide us strength during those days that really, really test us.
Yes.
So for everyone listening, remember, mental resilience isn't about silence. It's about the conversations you have with yourself. Those conversations you have with yourself when no one else is around and no one else is looking. So just remember, stay intentional, stay grounded, and we'll see you next time. This is Iron and Intention.